kids are coming up here and they're learning science, technology, engineering, the arts, math, and that's a program worthy, and I think everyone in the community, whether you got kids here, grandkids or not, whenever you get a chance to support your library, support thought centers, support things that give these children every advantage they can, because the reality is that our children are starting out already sort of behind the curve when you think about competing in a global market, when you think about their peers just 100 miles in any direction, whether you're in Charlottesville or you go to Blacksburg. We're competing against kids that have the advantage of learning centers and museums and different experiences, and part of that different experience is multiculturalism. It's not that you learn more in math class sitting beside someone that doesn't look like you. You learn more about life when you interact with people that have a different perspective than you. So walking to class, going to lunch, sitting down on the bus beside someone who doesn't have your similar story, your same background, that rounds a kid, and that's part of the educational process, deep education that we need, and our kids are deficient in that. The fact that I've never had a black man teach me anything until I was a man in my late 20s in college is something that it kind of shapes you, because you equate blackness and black life to the images you see on TV, whether that's a basketball player or whether that's rappers, and little kids see these images and they think, well, I can't really rap, so maybe I just need to pick up the basketball. And what we need is, we need more young black men going into education. We need more young people focusing on the arts, more people focusing on the sciences and those careers. Those aren't exclusive career paths. And Black History Month, in so many different ways, Black History Month forces all of us to sort of challenge our worldview and challenge, the accepted narrative about our shared history and our shared struggle. Black history is not a separate entity from history. Black history is chapters that are missing from the book. And, for as much as any of us try to keep up with what's going on around us, for as much as we might try to learn about the past, there are always things that we can learn. I mean, my ignorance didn't permit me to know about the story behind the Hidden Figures. I didn't even know that was real. So you think about the march to space. All of us are holding in our phones at home or in our pockets phones or devices that were made possible because of space exploration. And yet you have to wrestle this with the idea that the United States almost didn't make it into space because we allowed, historical discriminations and bigotries to stop our progress. So in one standpoint, it makes you wonder, wow, we might have been able to cure some of these diseases that folks have just been working together, but we are where we are in time, and to look at that time and to be honest about it, it doesn't cost anyone anything, and it's not about Black History Month being a vehicle to make white people feel angry or animus towards the past. And it's not about black folks artificially looking at the accomplishments of others as a way of finding pride. It's a way of understanding and learning how we got to this moment.
Amen.
How did we get here? And so a few weeks ago, I was fortunate to have some time at home, and I got to thinking and writing, and I wasn't bothering my wife and being weird. So get some work done, and I really was starting to think about, Black History Month is coming, and I just wrote down Black History Month, and there's a mathematical symbol for is greater than or equal to American history. And I sat and I just looked at that for a while, and it was a provocation, and sometimes when you write, you have to kind of go with provocations to get people to read what you're saying, but it wasn't a provocation meant to hurt. When you think about the idea of, American exceptionalism, it sort of creates in your mind a myth that we were sort of headed this way anyway, that we were going to come come to this moment in time naturally. And the reality is that our streets throughout the foundation of this country, throughout the Declaration of Independence to now, our streets have been filled with people who decided that the way we're living right now and the way things are going is untenable. We can't do this any longer. Something needs to change. And so you talk about the first big riot in American history, the Boston Tea Party, a celebrated event, taxation without representation, a government, a despotic government in many ways saying, we need you to produce these crops and pay these fees because we're over here and we're living large. And you have folks that were willing to die to say no. As a matter of fact, we're going to claim our own stake in this land and we're going to move forward. And not everybody was with that program. It was some folks just ready to give them the money and keep moving. But you had folks that were willing to die to sort of create a new path, a new way forward. And that was the foundation of this country. This country's root is rooted in civil disobedience that led to civil disobedience that caused riots that led to wars. And we fought a war. We fought a war to end that rule and to start our own way moving forward. And along the path of this country's foundation, from the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution, we had struggles that were going on. We had Federalist Papers that were written. People were trying to figure out how do we govern this land. And part of that governance dealt with the fact that we have a protected class of people, wealthy landowners, who, by many respects, these people, these farmers, these agrarian merchants, and these people that were trying to set up trade routes with the other parts of Europe, these folks have to have a certain amount of protections to move forward. And we have to make commerce move as smoothly as possible. And one way to do that is with these slaves, these indentured servants. And all the slaves that were in this land didn't come from Africa. As a matter of fact, we know that there were just as many, if not more, slaves of European descent in the original colonies that went on to be the 13 colonies in the original farmlands. And yet, as we moved forward and folks started to get their freedom, we still had the reality that there was a segment of people who did not meet the standards, so to speak, inalienable rights, endowed by our Creator, equality under the law. And yet some of these promises just did not apply to everyone. Not everyone had admission to the franchise. And that was a problem because you can't have a stated set of beliefs that exclude, and at that point in time, 22% of the inhabitants of the original 13 colonies were slaves. So how do we move forward with that? And folks were willing to die. One of the things that I like to talk about is inheritance. Like right now, if I said to Deacon Bill, I said, Deacon Bill, they found one of your great-great-grandmoms that PY missed. You got $10 million coming your way. Folks don't stop and question that. And if you give him the check and he cashes it and it's in his account and somebody come along trying to say, well, you didn't earn that, you need to give me that back, you'll have a fight on your hands. That sort of inheritance has been paid forward. And the only time people will fight you about that is if you call into question the narrative or the myth of American exceptionalism. And you say, well, we are here, but how did we get here? And how does our past affect our future? And folks can separate the two real quick. Oh, that's over, it ain't got nothing to do with that. Well, I say that we celebrate Black History Month and we've lost in our community, in the community of Bath County, the older churches. We see older churches that are shuttered. We've buried so many of our loved ones. And we've seen so many of the people from our age group and younger move on and leave. And we ask ourselves, well, what's left of this history? What's left of our place? And so that's why people like PY are so important, passing down the oral history. And every once in a while, it makes me so sad to look around and see that my wife is the youngest person in the room. And, you know, I wish we could get more young people into this, but everyone has their season. But one of the things that we have to do as conduits is to be able to collect as much of this information and knowledge as possible, and then share it with folks, to have it on display, to have it on hand. When I talk about the myth of American exceptionalism, it's not to diminish what this country has accomplished. It's not to diminish labor movements, not to diminish movements for equality. It's not to diminish those things, but it's to highlight those things. The myth of American exceptionalism says that we just woke up, God looked at us and said, you know what, out of all this creation of mine, I'm just going to go ahead and bless the rest of other folks. And P.Y. brought up Arlington National Cemetery. Well, I've never raised children. I've never sent a child to war. I've never buried a child. But if you would ask one of the mothers or fathers who has remains of their loved one at Arlington National Cemetery, they would tell you differently. That, matter of fact, this wasn't nothing magical, that folks were willing to fight and die for this.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my, yes.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So that's my disagreement with the notion of American exceptionalism, is that it discounts the contributions that everyday people, like the folks in this room, have made. A couple months back, we were able, about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, we were able to go to Washington and Lee and listen to Diane Natch talk, and she desegregated lunch counters in Tennessee, and she wrote her will at 19. Now, again, I don't have any kids, but you folks with kids, if your baby writes their will at 19 and hands you their will, you ain't letting them out the house again. And yet you had folks associated with this movement and all of these movements who have been willing to die. You have to have folks that are willing to sacrifice it all to make progress move forward. We know the history in this country. We know that women came over on the first 3 ships. And yet, it was 1919 before legislation was passed, 1921 before women could vote.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time you could burn a white woman at a stake in this country. You could set somebody on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know about any of y'all, but you try to get 4 or 5 of your friends together to set somebody on fire and see how they look at you. And yet, that's part of our history. That's part of who we are. That's part of the story.
The original divorce.
Yeah, you know, and so we have to be honest about where we started, because we can appreciate where we are now. Each and every one of us are living in someone else's Black history.
Yes.
100 years from now, everybody in this room will be gone. And folks will look back at this moment, this particular moment in time, and they will say, well, who was the folks talking about this? Was there a dissent? Were folks trying to push forward? Were folks trying to make, equality a dream, or did people just stop? Did Martin die and the dream die with him? And that's something that scares me, and it's a tough subject matter, because it causes people to kind of feel anxious in them. There are things that happen to each and every one of us that we might not be able to correctly describe to someone else. I've never been a woman walking down the street and been leered at somebody and wondered, how does that feel? I'm 6'1", 240 pounds. Folks don't even generally look at me. But I mean, I've never been a woman walking and think, is he looking too hard? Is that? So, because I've never felt that doesn't mean that it's not real. It doesn't mean that those feelings need to be discounted. And it's the same thing with feelings of discrimination. And so, whether the discrimination is coming from patriarchal brothers who are beating their chest in caveman fashion and disrespecting women, whether that discrimination comes from insecure straights harassing and harming gay and lesbian people, or whether that discrimination is coming from white folks towards Black folks or Black folks towards white folks, there has to be a dissent, and there has to be people willing to call into question an order that would allow that to continue. And so even though some of us have run parts of our race and our legs and feet are tired and maybe ready to sit down, I just ask each and every one of you to continue going. And if all you can do is just love folks a little bit better than you did the day before, that might be enough. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Could you explain a little bit more when you say American exceptionalism?
Well, you know,
Me, I just-
one of the things that I see and you read it or you hear folks talk about is, you know, this idea that, you know, the founding, the founding of America, that we were just blessed by God, like, and it's become so common that it's part of our vernacular, but that God just chose this whole big creation, but he chose this rock right here, this place right here, to bless a little bit more than the rest of the world.
I see.
And that, you know, we're the biggest, we're the strongest, we've got the largest military, we're here, and no one says, well, how did we get here? And, you know, the idea that this was just some set aside from the rest of the world, just from a theological perspective, you know, and I don't care which of the big books you go to, when you're talking about, you know, in the Christian belief of the looking out for the least of these, you know, you start your world analysis from, you know, the point of view of the orphan, the widow. You know, you look at the poor, you look at the folks that Jesus talked about the most. And if you look at the world from that standpoint, then you can't from a theological perspective just say, oh, well, you know, God just kind of liked us, he just dug us a little bit more over here, so that's why. And, you know, and you have to understand that, you know, everything that's in this room came out of the ground from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at even our technology, our TV, our phone, where does this stuff come from? You know, we've got ores that are being pulled out of the ground in countries that folks wouldn't want to live in. The Congo is the closest thing you can get to hell on earth. You got folks in Palestine that are living in an open air prison. And the reality is that none of us chose our lot in life. I mean, if I had the forethought as a child, I would have kept the exact same parents. I just would have added a couple more zeros onto their net worth. You know, I mean, but none of us chose, like,
Yes.
none of us chose. And so when you call into question the myth of American exceptionalism, you know, you have to address the fact that none of us chose where we are. And there's nothing wrong with wealth. There's nothing wrong with being born in a good situation. There's nothing wrong with any of that. There's nothing wrong with being poor. There's nothing wrong with being a woman. There's nothing wrong with being black. There's nothing wrong with being different. You know, what's wrong is the way our society has crafted narratives about those differences and about each other. I can tell you this, that, you know, the one thing younger people kind of do better than us and even our generation is that they kind of see some of the things that we have and some of the strife and troubles we deal with, and they just choose not to want it and be around it. You know, young folks just kind of like who they like. And, you know, and unless we put that stuff into them,
That's true.
they won't get it into them.
That's
And
true.
so,
That's
you know, I've seen this work in both directions. I tutored kids in the Petersburg school district that never went to school with a white person. Like from kindergarten until, you know, 9th, 10th, 11th grade, whenever they dropped out before I got to them in the GED program, that never went to school with a white person. Never, like, had someone that was just different from them that they talked to or knew. Likewise in Howland County, I mean, short of my wife, Miss Adderton, and the old superintendent up there, I mean, some of those kids just don't know anybody like me. And that right there lessens the quality of each and every one of our lives, because none of this movement would have been possible with only one person moving in any direction. No one group of people would have been able to get us to today. So when you think about women's issues, you think about, you know, Susan B. Anthony. For as courageous a woman as Susan B. Anthony was, she didn't even have inside of her the ability to see that the equality she was fighting for women should be extended to women of color. And she came from an abolitionist background. She had folks in her family ready to die, you know, and So we don't get to hear without courageous white brothers and sisters, a woman cut against the grain. I always tell a story about John Brown. I don't know how many of y'all got kids, but he had a dream in the middle of the night, woke up, God told him to free slaves. And took his kids to go try to do it. They were ready to rob the munitions dump up here in Harvest Ferry, West Virginia. Took his kids with 26 people, fighting Marines, to steal weapons to try to arm slaves. Took watched his kids killed in war to make a day like this possible. The foresight, the vision. Now, I'm certain that everybody in here loves their children. I've seen one of y'all about to kill your own son. I'm not killing him. But you think about your baby, and you're gonna put a gun in your baby's arm and fight for somebody else's freedom. I mean, that's powerful, man. That's I've got white folks that I love to death. I got white folks that have done for me the things my family members wouldn't do. You know? And the thing is that each and every one of us, though, for as far as we've come, each and every one of us got cousins or uncles. Somebody that need a little bit more work.
A whole lot of white people done more for me than the blacks.
I mean,
But that's true, yeah.
I don't think about that.
Yeah.
I did when I was young, I don't know when I was young. I had some prejudice in me when I was young, but after growing up, nobody.
But it's hard because, you know, the onus sometimes is on people to create pathways to forgiveness and growth. I grew up in Hot Springs, I mean, Bath County, the sort of subtle things that we saw. You know, sometimes folks weren't saying and doing things to you to intentionally hurt you. Sometimes folks just didn't know any better. Like, one of the things that I've tried to get black parents to not do anymore is to tell their children, you have to be twice as good. There's nothing inherently wrong with telling your child you have to be twice as good, as long as you preface it with, there's nothing wrong with you. I'm preparing you for a society that might not treat you as well.
That's right.
Because when you tell a child they have to be twice as good, at the same time the child hears, well, what's wrong with it? You know, and you build a sort of insecurity inside of you. And so, you know, that sort of spirit of community, that sort of spirit of self-pride and self-worth is something that each and every one of us, you know, should we accept the call, is something that we have to make sure we do better about it. It's, our struggle is not over until each and every one of us are as safe and as thought about in the same manner as everyone else. And, you know, the fact that in this day and age you still have very accomplished women that make less doing the same jobs as their men. You know, I mean, that's not just something people say and, you know, it's a touchy situation. Like, there are women who work jobs that, you know that they kind of cap out somewhere and they never get the raises. Women are disproportionately represented in higher education. Women are graduating at higher rates than men, and that's been going on for almost 2 full decades now. And you see, does that translate into the job market? You know,
Translate into college level,
Yeah.
10-year.
Yeah. I mean, you even tenured path. You know, you see women that struggle for that. It's a reality that each and every one of us, and so that's what, you know, Black history has to start these sort of conversations, because at any moment there is a moment that needs to be called into question. At any moment there needs to be a critique of the time we're living in. And you know, so for me, Black History Month is a gateway drug to activism for some people, because if you get it in your blood and you understand that, you know, Dr. King was surveilled the last 7 years of his life. One of the reporters that was embedded with him was a CIA agent. He had a code name, Zorro. You think about, you know, the fact that Dr. King's such a beloved figure now. The reality is that Dr. King gave the majority of the money he made through speaking engagements to the movement. That he died, he couldn't even, near the end of his life, couldn't even really get speaking engagements anymore. Boston University wouldn't let him come back to campus to talk to the students. So we love folks. You know, Muhammad Ali would be another example. You know, Muhammad Ali died last year. It was a great send-off, beautiful. But, I mean, that doesn't comport with how he lived. I mean, Muhammad Ali lost the ability to take care of his family because he wouldn't fight in a war. I mean, and so that's part of the story too. I mean, it's not an either or, it's an and both. How does this fit together? But I thank y'all. I kept y'all long.
Thank you.